Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. I think it's an amazing webinar on pedagogies for EIDM and capacity development in Africa. So it's a really exciting journey for the AEN. And I think I'm chairing today. My name is Siziwe Ngwabe. I am the operations lead for Africa Evidence Network. So I think I'll just do the housekeeping rules just to make sure that we all enjoy the webinar and be able to interact with each other. And secondly, I think also just to join a few dots to where we come from and how we got here today in terms of this particular webinar. And then after that, I'll hand over to the moderator for the discussion that I think we are waiting for during this webinar. Just a few housekeeping rules. I think we will invite you as participants to participate as much as possible. I think there'll be a segment where you'll be invited to participate and contribute. And then secondly, this session will be recorded. And I hope everyone else is okay with the fact that we record so that we're able to share the recording with you and also those that haven't been able to attend but are really interested in the topic that we're discussing today. We would like your cameras to be off, except for the two panelists and the moderator, so that at least we can see them as they delve into these discussions. And then also, please keep your mics off until maybe you are given an opportunity to share your comment or your input, or you have questions, so to avoid a bit of noise during the webinar, so that it's nice and easier for everyone to hear the discussions. In case of any technical challenges that you'll be experiencing, please contact Precious using the chat, and then she'll be there to sort you out in terms of what you will be needing then. And then please do engage with us also on the chat box. As the conversations are going, you have a question, you have a comment, you have an input, just put it on the chat box. And I think there'll be an opportunity to pull those into the broader discussion of this webinar. So Charity will be managing our chat box for us. Just then to connect those dots, I think the manifesto is one of those documents that we've been talking about throughout this series, because it's one of those that was drafted by the working group, which is the AEN members that were pulled together towards Evidence 2020 online. So this manifesto is an output for that event that was hosted. So basically, it is just a declaration from all Africa's evidence ecosystem about the kind of capacity development we practice. And also what is interesting about it is also Africa-led, because the members of the working group were from the different parts of the continent. And also it serves as a resource and inspiration to the evidence ecosystem in the continent. And then I think it also challenges the mainstream views on capacity building in EIDM in the continent. So the manifesto is available on the AEN website. Please engage with it. And also I'll put the link on the chat so that you continue to engage with the document and see where we come from and where these discussions join from. And then about this webinar series, I think we've been doing, this is the 5th webinar we are hosting. We launched this series during Africa Evidence Week last year. And the objective really is just to share experiences with one another and also enhance connection, because we want to always ensure that we connect with one another. That is one of the things that the AEN really likes to do, and make sure that people connect with each other, doing similar work or interesting work that you want to be in touch with others. And also I think then the manifesto is also available for you just to see where all of this is coming from and where it is going. And I think at this point then, I'll take this opportunity to hand over to Carina, who is the moderator for this session this afternoon. Thank you. Over to you, Carina.
Great, thank you, Siziwe, and really, really super exciting for me to be here. I am really thrilled to be in conversation this afternoon with Rose and Rhona. So maybe just to to continue with what Sizwe said about the scene so far. We started the series with kind of very broadly talking about capacity development for evidence use in Africa. We delved into 2 specific areas of designing capacity development for equity and what EIDM capacity development aimed at system level change is about. And in our, I think it was February, no, by March. So in our January webinar, we talked about relationships and partnerships in EIDM capacity development. And as you indicated, today we really want to explore various pedagogies for EIDM capacity development in Africa. And so maybe just to set the scene for that, just to remind you, when we talk about EIDM capacity development, our manifesto in its definition of what that is talks of refers to 3 levels of capacity development that is relevant when we talk EIDM capacity development. It is enhancing and sharing capacities, and here it includes knowledge, skills, values of individuals and groups related to evidence use in Africa. The second level is how we improve organizations and their articulation of the evidence ecosystem. And then thirdly, it's at the systems level, improving systems, processes, structures, institutional structures of the African evidence ecosystem. And all of this is about effective, equitable, and ethical use of evidence for the Africa that we want. So maybe that's specific about today. When we say we are interested in talking about pedagogies, EIDM pedagogies in Africa, maybe we should start by just kind of departing from what is pedagogy. And I was telling earlier in a session 2-3 weeks ago when we talked pedagogy, someone said, you know, it's just one of those odgies. It's just one of those words that confuses way too much than it illuminates. And I think for me, the easiest explanation is to say that pedagogy is really the art and science of teaching or training. So it departs from assumptions about how we learn, and therefore using that to inform how we design learning experiences, and whether that learning is through training or for teaching or through workshop or whatever the mechanisms that we use. So I think really when we say EIDM pedagogies, for our purposes, what we refer to, what is the arts and science of EIDM capacity development, probably crudely put. Our manifesto refers specifically, there's a series of principles in our manifesto, and there's 3 specific principles that speak to pedagogies. The one says we foreground pedagogy, and I'm reading for you from the manifesto. It says, for one, we utilize adult principles such as inspired by Paulo Freire and Michael Knowles. Second, another principle, I think is principle 8, says we acknowledge the importance of collaborative peer learning, that is social learning. Engagement and participation are crucial in design and delivery of our capacity sharing efforts. And a third principle that speaks to pedagogy says we value and foreground bridging of theory and practice, and thus learning by doing. Now, typically, I think there's a whole range of, if we look at educational theories, a whole range of pedagogies that might be relevant to EIDM capacity development that's aimed at the individual level. And they're typically pedagogies such as social, peer, network learning, critical or digital pedagogies, socially just pedagogies, feminist pedagogies, of late decolonial pedagogies. But I think one of the interesting things I think we want to probably definitely delve in today is, but what does EIDM pedagogy mean for organizations and systems? And I would love to explore that with our 2 panelists. So maybe I think the really nice is that today we have 2 very highly regarded and very experienced people in Rhona and Rose. And I'm really thrilled, as I say, to have you both here today. So very welcome. And I think what's the added advantage is that not only do we have 2 individuals that's really highly regarded in the EIDM space in Africa, but also across the world, we also, both of them, work for organizations that is doing such sterling work and have such sterling reputations for the work they do around EIDM capacity development. So if I can introduce to you Dr. Rhona Mijumbi. She is the founding director of the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis. That's a knowledge brokering institution for EIDM that is based at Makerere University in Uganda. She's a health policy analyst and a research scientist. as well as a senior lecturer at the of public policy at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. Rhona has a special interest in evidence and policy and decision-making processes, and she's been leading teams on developing and evaluating rapid response mechanisms, has supported numerous teams across the continent. On that, she has a number of mentees and proteges, and if you've been at any of our webinars before, you would have heard Lawrence referred to her, and various others of us referred to her as she's really the godmother of EIDM rapid responses in Africa. And if you've been an AEN member for a while, you would have had on numerous occasions, whether through learning exchanges or through workshops or through presentation or training, you would have had opportunity where Rhona really shares very freely of her expertise with AEN members. We also have Dr. Rose Oronje. Rose is the Director of Public Policy and Knowledge Translation. She's also head of the Kenyan office of AFIDEP, the African Institute for Development Policy. She provides strategic leadership in the design and conduct of research and policy analysis, political economy analysis, and knowledge translation, and very relevant for this afternoon, design and delivery of capacity development interventions aimed at enabling EIDM, as well as knowledge translation and policy engagement interventions to support evidence uptake and decision making. And I think you would know that AFIDEP, aside from a whole range of other stuff they do, is really known for the amazing work around strengthening the capacity of researchers and knowledge intermediaries and evidence translation and policy engagement. And as with Rhona, if you've been an AEN member for a while, you would have had the privilege to have engaged and interacted with Rose through workshops, presentations, webinars, etc. So thank you very much, both of you, for being here this afternoon and for our conversation. So I wonder if I can start our conversation, get into it then, with asking each of you to share with us one of your capacity development initiatives and what the pedagogy is that informed that particular initiative. And when I say pedagogy here, it's kind of what is the learning, what's the assumptions about learning that informed the design of that particular capacity development initiative. Rhona, or Rose, can I start with you? You're the furthest left on my screen.
Thanks, Carina. I was hoping you'd start on the farthest right. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and to be part of this conversation. And I'll start just by sharing one, perhaps a more recent intervention on EIDM capacity development. Of course, we've had several interventions, earlier ones focusing a lot on policymakers. But I'm going to focus on one that has focused on researchers in terms of developing their knowledge translation capacity. This is the Evidence Leaders in Africa initiative, which had several components, but one of them was developing researchers' capacity in knowledge translation, basically their understanding of the political processes, but then also being very strategic in engaging these processes and translating their evidence into easy to understand products. This initiative reached 23 researchers from over 20 universities across the region and representing 9 countries across Africa. And the purpose was to bring these researchers on board based on interest. So they actually applied for the training program, which was quite competitive because we ended up with 23 when we received applications of more, nearly 30 of them. And the purpose of doing that was for us to attract people who are actually interested in this type of training and these skills. And the initiative involved training in knowledge translation, a wide range of things from understanding political context to developing evidence products like policy briefs, very good presentations, but also being able to develop networks and stay engaged with government policy making process as well as political types of processes. Now, if I may move more to the pedagogy approach that we use or that informed this. So besides this initiative, our approach in all our trainings has been to be clear that you are targeting adult learners, you are targeting people who are very busy in their work. And so you want the training to respond to their needs, right? And so with this, we have ensured that we then focus on adult learning, but also importantly, the overarching approach has also been learner-centered, so that the learner is right at the center of the way we have designed this particular training and mentorship program, so that the learner is the one driving that process. So a merge of learner-centered approach and of course bringing in adult learning principles. What have those meant for the design of the program? I'll just mention some of the things, and of course, if there are any that I'll run over that I need to get into more detail, I'll share that as well. Using a learner-centered approach as well as focusing on adult learning principles has meant a couple of things for us. One of them has been that we conduct a needs assessment. And so for this particular program, once these people applied for the training, part of the application was also for them to indicate some of the things they're interested in as part of this training program. And so then we used that then to go ahead and design an assessment to gauge their interests and needs within knowledge translation. And all of us here know that knowledge translation is so broad, it can mean so many things. And so we wanted as much as possible to have a very targeted training program that speaks to the needs of the 23 people that ended up being selected for this. So apart from needs assessment, it also meant that adult learners also, because they choose the kinds of training, they're also coming with a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, yeah? But they're also coming looking for specific practical solutions, you know, to their day-to-day work. And so what we did was to then ask participants, since you've expressed interest in this training, can you identify a research issue and actually come to the training with your own research, that you are going to use this training to, you know, translate it into whatever product you want to engage with policymakers. And so before the training, we engage them defining the agenda, but also asking them to be ready and prepare presentations of their research or research issue that links directly to a policy, and which they would use the training to then start the process of translating that for specific policymakers. And so being very practical was very important for us, and ensuring that they're the ones coming with the problem they want to use the training to solve. The other thing in terms of practical sense, in terms of what it meant, was the need for us to design the training in a way that it's practice-oriented. And so lots of practical exercises. We build in individual level exercises where people would use their own research to start preparing PowerPoint presentation and start thinking about who are the specific policymakers who I need to engage to actually address the issue that this research is focused on. And so we build in individual practical, but also group practicals, just so that people can share knowledge, they can share their own experiences, because they're bringing a lot of these on board. And so in terms of thinking of how much the whole training, which was a 5-day followed by a 6-month mentorship, a 5-day intensive training, much of that time was actually used within groups, small group discussions, individual practical exercises, and with the trainers being more of supportive, really, you know, reviewing, providing very constructive feedback, just to enable learners to make progress. Of course, there are a few other small things like having learners go through the agenda and agree that they want, that's how they want to have the, you know, the training run, having them set their own ground rules. So it's not us setting the ground rules, basically just ensuring that they take ownership and they feel that this training is ours and we're able to drive it. Of course, the mentorship is another component of it that I feel like if I start getting into it, there'll be a lot of issues. But just note that the mentorship, we've also ensured that it's driven by the learners. And so they define what they want to do during the mentorship, the specific things they want to achieve during the 6 months. And then they're allocated mentors. And in terms of setting up when to meet, reviewing what learners have done, it's actually the learner who drives that. That has a lot of good things and a lot of bad things, because many learners often, like for this particular training, a good number of them actually dropped off and they didn't complete their tasks, because then we wanted them to be the ones driving the mentorship, as opposed to one person being the one looking for them. We wanted them to be the ones drive it. Some of them did drive it, some of them did not. So lots of lessons there in terms of thinking of learner-centered and adult learning. Of course, knowing that these are also people who are very busy. And so sometimes it might not be that they're not interested anymore, but they've gotten very busy with their day-to-day job. And so a need for some balance in terms of how you drive the mentorship to just facilitate learning. So I'll stop there. I've said a lot of things. I'm not sure I've answered your question. I hope so, but I'll stop there.
Totally. Totally. So, I mean, I think there's a whole range of phrases that jumped out to me as you were talking. It's learner-centered, adult learners that take ownership, learn by doing, group work where they learn from one another, learn from practical solutions. I think there's a whole range of learning that's been foregrounded that I think is so key. Rhona, what example would you give of a recent capacity development initiative or current one?
Carina, I'm not too sure I want to dwell on an example, but I think because so much that Rose has said will actually go straight into the example, but maybe what I want to do is to bring additional, sort of values or concepts, that probably Rose will also recognize. But before that, I'm so glad that you actually gave the definition for pedagogies, because and ideally, by the way, today a better person would have been our head of capacity building, Mrs. Rose Izizinga, who she heads our capacity building portfolio, but also the internal capacity building, ensuring that we are better than when we come in. And when she first joined us, she has about like 40 years experience of being an educationist. When she first joined us, we want to do the pedagogy session, because we do this, for the training of trainers. And so she said, "What is pedagogy? And who are you dealing with?" And, we sort of threw around the idea we thought we had. And she took us through a whole session of understanding. And she told us, most likely what you're talking about is andragogy. I said, oh, okay. So she actually took us through understanding adult learning and the fact that pedagogy might be more, with the, I tend to push it towards the pediatrics. It's content focused, and the andragogy is, lantern and all things around that. So that was a good one for us. You should have been here today doing this very well. But to actually think about things that have proven useful for us, that we now make sure are embedded in all the capacity building we do. I'll give you two examples or two values on each. So where we plan capacity building for our clients, users of evidence or producers of evidence, and then when we are also doing our own capacity building within the team, we are knowledge brokers, and definitely there are things that should also guide the way we do that. So one is contextualized capacity building. So you will find that there's all these manuals, there's all these approaches that almost assume that capacity building is very, very similar or the same wherever you go. And yet, as you continue to do this work, you find that different settings learn differently, So leave alone the different persons, like individuals having their learning, capabilities and how they do it. Even settings actually have different, ways that they learn. So the way you set up the timing and the times, the delivery modes, the amount of work you're expecting people to do. So if people have done workshops, they will notice that there are some places where you can go and give them work to do through the night, and come back and report in the morning. And there are places where that is just not a norm. They'll be like, where are you from again? Remind me, So those small things about context are very, very important as you do capacity building. So one has to contextualize their teaching. My team knows that we do not have a standard slide deck. By the way, we don't. every teaching is new. So you will go down, make new examples, look at new activities. What is it that brings it home for this particular group that you're working with? And then two, in there, each trainee is actually unique. You know, this might sound like, sound cliche, but each trainee is actually unique. It is very, very important to look at the profiles before you engage. Again, if the people on this webinar that we have worked with so far, they will know that if we don't have the profiles of those we're going to train 2 weeks before the training, it's called off. Too many times, organizers arrive at a training destination and they do not know anything about who they're going to engage, or you see them scribbling as introductions are happening in that first session, or they wait for the fun games where you're introduced as a certain animal or somebody you have met, for about 5 seconds introduces you. So you keep wondering, what preparation have they actually done if they do not know who they're going to help, So they are assuming something about this group, but actually that is very, very unhelpful. And you go through like 2 weeks and you might have helped 1 or 2 people, but not others, okay? And then if it's within the organization, I'll give 2 values around this, and then, we can build on this later. But if it's within your organization, again, consider the person and their positive attributes before you push your own agenda. So very often, we recruit and immediately we're looking at your job description, after 1 month, but will she be able to take notes? She's a secretary, but will she be able to take notes? Very quickly we are judging this person on the attributes of the organization, like what did we bring you here for? And we forget very fast that they're also sort of individuals. So one thing that we push very hard for, or that we have learned to push, is to acknowledge the attributes of this person and use them to ease them into their role and responsibilities. So if you think a person is a good negotiator, because some of these things are easy to pick up very quickly. You think they're a good negotiator, they're a good communicator, or they design things very well. Give them the opportunity within their work that they are doing to be able to incorporate these things, One example, in my team, we have somebody who designs things, doodles very well, is able to design, what do you call it? Our documents, he makes it colorful, he makes it all sorts of things. Quickly pick up on some of those things. And it not only gives the person satisfaction, but it gives them a chance, it gives you a chance to do, it gives them a chance to do what they like, but also it creates an opportunity for you to give praise and approval, the kind of things that we all are craving for, and this just sort of eases them into the environment that they're in. They're already panicking about doing things right. And just hearing, wow, you do that very well, makes a whole lot of a difference, So look for the attributes of the person before you look for the attributes of the organization, if that makes sense, and use those to ease people into their positions, which are very often daunting, when they first come in. But also be ready to let people go, As you build teams for evidence-informed decision-making, the one thing you will realize is that these teams are fluid, like people move really fast. And this is because of the skill set that they quickly acquire. To be a good knowledge broker, to be a good knowledge entrepreneur, there's a certain skill set that you need. And once people acquire this, they become really, really like hot cake. Everybody will want them. But that's beside the point. As you build capacity within an organization, be ready to let people go. I call it training with wings. Yeah. Give them wings to fly within the organization, give them opportunities to do things. But also, if they get a better opportunity the next day, whatever better means, be ready to let them go. Very often, we are holding on to people, and that negative and hesitant vibe actually comes out. And I don't think that it grows people. It doesn't grow teams. It doesn't give people wings. You're often kind of, without thinking about it, unconsciously, you're actually stifling people because you're so afraid that they'll go, So you're not giving them, your all. You're not giving them your all as a mentor, as a leader. And I think that is one thing that I personally advocate for every year. If you're part of my team, you've got to let me know how you've gotten better, and that if I got rid of you today, you know, who will pick you up and what will they gain from you? I would like to be proud, you know, for people to say, oh, she was part of Rhona's team. Oh, wow, you know. So let's build capacity with wings. That's, you know, that's what I call it. But I'll stop for now. Karina, back to you.
I love that expression, capacity development with wings. Because I think if I can use that to then take us but further in the conversation, because your capacity with wings make me think of what your aim in your capacity development is a system. You are not interested just in building Rhona's team. There's a bigger goal, there's a bigger aim at, there's a system that we all want to enhance and strengthen. And so I would like us to explore a little bit together. So typically when we talk pedagogies and EIDM pedagogies, it's very much aimed at this kind of individual level. And I think pedagogies, you know, and it's easy to say, but this is how individuals learn. We know adults learn by doing together, by being things practical, by, you know, all of those things. But what is part of what we say EIDM capacity development is about is that it's about this things that happen at a systems level. And so I would like to explore with you a little bit, what does EIDM capacities, or what does EIDM pedagogies at a system level mean? I mean, is pedagogy the right word here? Should we talk something else? Because I think so, in a way, what I'm asking you is like, how does systems learn? And how do we design to help systems to learn? And I think system learning for me is just another word to say system change, because I think that's systems learn when systems change. So Rose, can I start with you maybe to comment a little bit about this idea of how systems learn, and what is the pedagogies or other words that we need to use here?
Thanks, Carina. I would probably go more for how systems learn or how systems change and stay away from pedagogy, which I find as jargon. And I think within this field, we are always trying to move away from jargon because it can easily become the barrier to the use of the evidence that you want to have used. Coming back to the issue of how do systems learn, one of the things I keep realizing and reflecting on is that when you talk about nurturing a culture of EIDM, looking at individual level type of things that we've talked about seem almost to be like the low-hanging fruits, if I may use that. But when you come back to systems and structures and mechanisms, that's the elephant in the room, you know, because we have to remember that systems are very complex. You know, because there are a mix of people, ideas, bureaucracies, politics, power dynamics. And so when it comes to how do systems learn, we have to recognize that they're complex, and how they learn is as complex as the systems are. And so some of the things I will say will probably give you answers. Some of them may just leave you with questions because it remains a very key area. Because if you're thinking about EIDM sustainability, then our investments, interventions need to really target at the system level, trying to have systemic changes over time, but acknowledging that this is very complex. This will take time, obviously, and we'll need a lot more investments for that change to come about. Now, having said that, I'll mention a couple of things. I guess I'm probably focusing more on the barriers than enablers. So I'll focus on a few things just to try to respond to the issue of how the systems learn, having said what I've said. One of them is just ensuring that the system, there's a lot of political and leadership interest in the issue, and for this case, it's in EIDM, in evidence-informed decision making. Is there political leadership? Is there interest at that high level? You know, because you're thinking of changing systems. Sometimes, I know system change involves everybody, but sometimes people in some powerful positions can be good drivers as far as the change you need. But of course, we know that everyone in the system has influence. And so having that leadership and political level ownership and involvement in the work that you're designing around EIDM is so important as part of a good enabler for the change that you're thinking about. And that is one of the things that for us has been important in how we design our interventions focused on systemic changes, ensuring that even just defining the problem is a conversation, with people within a government agency or a government ministry or department for that matter, so that our understanding of the problem is based on their understanding. What is their problem? Can they define their problem themselves and some of the ways they think that problem could be resolved? And in this matter, of course, now thinking about EIDM. And so for some of our interventions that have focused on systemic changes, we've actually defined the issues together with the government agencies. We have work going on with ministries of health in Kenya, Malawi, and Uganda. And part of that started from ensuring that we are on the same table with the ministries as we start defining the problem. And then, of course, out of those discussions, then go forward and define some solutions, that could address that problem. So leadership, ownership, political engagement is important. The other thing I can talk about is ensuring that there are champions within those systems, within those processes. And of course, champions may sound very much as an individual intervention, but change happens within the systems because that change is often being driven by champions, people who believe in change. You might have somebody who will tell you, oh, that will never happen in this ministry, or that will never happen in this department. And then another individual comes in the same role, and of course, appreciating that, again, for bad or for worse, turnover is always very high in bureaucratic positions. And so today you have somebody who tells you, oh, the ministry can't change that. And then tomorrow you have somebody else who comes in and says, this can be done, And so appreciating that change can be very fast or can be very slow, but often individuals within those systems have a big role to play in driving some of the change that we hope. So being able to identify those individuals and working with them, ensuring that they own the work, they own the process, and they drive that change within their institutions. That is so important. It's some of the lessons we've learned as AFIDEP, that yes, we are a research and policy institute, and we are keen to see systemic changes happening within government departments, but we are outside. And for that change to happen, you need individuals, either leaders or champions within those systems, to be the ones defining the problem and driving that change. The final thing I can say around that is just the recognition that systemic change needs time. It can take a long time. And so these interventions that, you're given money for 2 years or 3 years and you expect to make change within that period, it's just something we have to continue challenging ourselves and challenging funders as well. That systemic change will take time. And so there's need for more time, there's need for more investments, and of course, just drawing lessons as we go, because these institutions are also very dynamic. People are changing, policies are changing, contexts are changing. Now we have a pandemic, tomorrow there'll be no pandemic, and all those play out, in the interventions you're trying to implement. So I'll stop there and maybe hear a bit from Ron and yourself, but that's the area where that's the big elephant in the room, that we are all touching on one small part of the elephant. We are yet to even come close to tackling the elephant. Thanks.
Rhona, you're welcome to jump in.
Yeah, thanks. So Rose really raises pertinent issues, and building on to that, I would like to actually sort of turn this over, on its head. Like, how do one would want to think about how these individual pedagogies or individual approaches that we have, how we can take those, because I think we're doing very well at the individual, training the individual, training institutions. But I think your question and a lot of what Rose is saying is there's still a huge gap at the system level, and so one would think about, okay, so all of these things that we've done so well, how do we take them up, almost like scale up? And I then would sort of come and throw, a spanner in the works and say, maybe we've done it wrong. you know? Maybe we've done it wrong. Ideally, it should be the other way around, that the system level should be asking of what we have been doing, the individual and the institutional. Meaning the system level needs to inform us about what we should do for them, if that makes sense at all. And what we should do for the individual and what we should do for the institutions within them. And if we do it right, it would then additively, you know, come back to feed the system level. So I'll give an example that maybe, you know, people can relate to, that just the same way a country analyzes and says, we need 6,000 nurses, you know, or the same way that analyses have been made, like by the World Health Organization, and they say a country, you know, that has such a burden of disease, to be able to meet certain targets, they would need this number of this kind of cadre. So they need 10,000 lab technicians, they need 6,000 this, 400 that, okay? And then all strategies in that country are adjusted to provide those numbers, okay? So they say 6,000 nurses, all strategies are adjusted to provide 6,000 nurses, not 6,000 doctors, not 400 doctors, not 10,000 lab technicians, 6,000, that's the number, nurses is the quality, is the cadre that we're looking for, okay? So very often we start all of these capacity building, and I am part of this system that I'm talking about. So very often we start without that system level consideration. But because there is also a great need, we kind of get away with it, you know? So the same way you would, you know, they would say, we need 6,000 nurses. And then you go ahead and train 10 doctors. Because there is also a need in the doctor space, you kind of get away with it. But the gap of the nurses remains, okay? So the same way, very often we start without that system level consideration, but because there's that great need, we get away with it when it comes to the numbers. But with the quality of the cadre, we could actually very easily miss the mark, and I think we often do. So that is one thing. For us to get to the system level interventions, the system has to inform us what is it that it needs, what is it that it wants. Now, this relates to the second thing I'm going to say, and also Rose, I think, has raised it, you know, that the second thing is having an informed and supportive leadership. Yes, for me, the biggest thing is informed. Supportive, I think, will come if somebody is informed. So system level interventions require a lot of resources that are being competed for by, you know, so many issues. So too often as implementers, we are convinced, but we do a poor job convincing the powers that be. For some reason, we imagine that they actually know or they understand, but not everybody in the leadership and managerial positions actually understand what it is this is about. They're not informed, you know, when it comes to evidence. What is evidence? What does it do? I've been making decisions for 20 years without the kind of things you're talking about. And this country has never fallen off the map. What exactly are you talking about, you know? So we have to get to a point where they understand, they are informed, and the buy-in will come. They'll be quite supportive, you know, we'll get that supportive leadership, and you need it for system level, you know, interventions or system level capacity building. That's the capacity we need to be building at that point. So interventions will not be scaled up, good as they are. So we've done very good work with the individuals, we've done good work with institutions, but if the managers do not understand what we're talking about, and this I actually did hear from, you know, certain, in a director's training in Uganda, where they said, this is really good, it has changed my thinking, but if my boss doesn't know what you know, about this, I won't have the space to actually, you know, implement or push for it. So we need to transform at that sort of level. And we need, and like I said, you know, it requires resources. System level interventions, for us to get these things to that level, it requires resources. There's no other way around it, you know? So often we are very excited about taking interventions to scale, without really thinking about the resources that are needed. So for example, you will hear us in capacity building getting excited that now maybe we need to introduce this in the curriculum. We need to talk to university A and B, you know, and we don't go to the point of thinking about, are there enough teachers and lecturers to actually take this to scale? You know, is there enough demand in terms of the students? We're excited about, you know, the people who come to our workshops, and we think those are the numbers. That's the demand. We are excited about the training of trainers that we've carried out, and we think these people can train others, okay? And we forget that a systems level intervention is huge. So the kinds of resources that take this to scale, we have to give very good thought. And then, of course, link this back with how much the leadership understands what these resources will be like. Back to you, Carina.
Good. Again, for both of you, just such amazing ideas and things that jump up and stimulate my thinking around this. I think one of the things listening to both of you that really is reinforced for me is how in the EIDM field we really need to make much more in terms of understanding how systems work. Because I think if we say systems must change and we want systems to learn, do we know how systems work? And I think there's something for me when I think systems, and I've been doing quite a bit of exploration around systems thinking and complexity and those kind of ideas, and holism, you know, some is more than the whole of its parts, all of those kind of things. Honestly, I think there's so much we need to get our fingers around to really understand how systems work. And I think one element of systems that I have realized is that systems are, when you are trying to understand the systems, there's systems nested in systems. So for example, if I talk the evidence ecosystem, and I think all of us agree probably that in the evidence ecosystem, the user, the use, and it's whether it's the policymaker, but the decision system is really in the middle of all of this. That drives all of this. So, Rhona, am I right if you say we need to understand, you know, and it's about the system is asking. It's really the decision makers that we're talking about. That's the system that's at the heart. Am I right?
They are at the heart of the system, but we also, like you said, there are systems within systems. So you will have, you know, that national level. You have so many sub-national level systems as well. You have important institutions that formulate, you know, a system of its own. For instance, if you had some sort of association, you know, so there are systems within systems, and you are right when you say, you know, the people who make decisions within those are actually at the heart of it.
Yeah, and so for me, a large extent, then, if part of the key thing that we need to get to is to depart, the way you kind of turn it around to say, but we need to depart from what are the system asking for in terms of change and then in terms of capacity development. It sounds to me then a large part of what we need to do is actually advocacy that is at the systems level. You know, and I think both, you know, Rose, you also referring to political leadership, interest, you know, champions. And I think there's really, so it's nearly like a big part of, you know, the pedagogy of EIDM is really advocacy work as well. There's a big element around advocacy work. And that leads me to a question I want to ask you, because I think a big part of advocacy work, if I want to convince a system, or if I want to, you know, be part of the system, I need to be able to show a system that these things are working, or these are possibilities. And I think it relates to a question also, I think, that Kerry posted in the chat for us. And that is about how do we know that these initiatives that we're trying around capacity development, that includes system level stuff, how do we know that they actually work, that they are actually making the difference? And I think Kerry asked us as what are the tools and the methods that we can use to assess, not these like the evaluation of this training initiative, but those kind of longer term outcomes that we actually know is making a difference at the system level. Any of you have ideas or examples of how we do that and what that requires of us? Rhona, you happy to go? Oh, sorry, Rose, you there? Good.
Oh, Okay, sorry. I guess I can go because I don't have an answer. I just want to share some examples. So measuring long-term impact on systems, of course, we have to look at it also from understanding the complexity within the systems. And so the measurement as well needs to be nuanced in terms of what we mean by change. One of the things I'll say is for us thinking about change from the very beginning over time. So even as you think about long-term change, thinking about some of the things that will be changing over time to give you that long-term change. I'm saying that because sometimes we are not measuring those small things, you know, commitments or interest or declarations. We are focused on seeing the ministry, for instance, put in money for their research department. You know, for us, for some time, that was an important advocacy for one of the initiatives we implemented in Kenya and Malawi since 2014 and 2017. We really wanted to see some commitment in terms of financing of their own research departments. But, you know, that is a long-term thing, you know, and so what are the small things you're looking for even as you wait for the big change that you want to see happen? Some of the things we have done, and this may or may not answer Kerry's question, but some of the things we have done is to conduct interviews, or rather a mix of surveys and one-on-one interviews with key people within these systems. And that is several months after the intervention, you know, has ended. And so we've done that for some of our interventions, where you go back and actually randomly select people in the ministry, not even the people who benefited from the intervention, but just select people to understand if they heard about it, any change that is sustained, if, you know. And when you do that, you realize that often some of the interventions we have, you know, they don't have system level change, you know, while some of them do. For instance, one of the surveys we did after several months of our intervention ending, did pick out some interesting things that we wouldn't have picked up. You know, so one of them was the fact that some of the people we had trained within the ministry actually went ahead to institute a specific policy that was now being implemented based on the evidence synthesis they did as part of our training. You know, and this was picked out of the interviews we were doing, not necessarily with the people who benefited from the training, but we just randomly selected leaders within the ministry, so that we're not just targeting those we have engaged, but targeting, you know, key leaders across the ministry, just to get a sense of, did we have any system level change after these 3.5 years of implementation? So we've used those types of surveys to go back and just find out what is going on. Of course, some of the things we've learned is that one of the tools we developed, the evidence-informed decision-making training, guideline, and as well as training curriculum, we realized that actually one of the institutions was now using that guide and curriculum to do further training at subnational level, which is something we wouldn't have picked, and it wasn't even one of the things we were expecting would happen. But this comes out of going back after the intervention has ended and having those questions. The challenge there is that often you don't have funding, you know, because these are donor-funded projects, let's just face it. And so once the project ends, you've totally run out of funds. So for us as AFIDEP, what we've done is now to explore other funding to see whether we can do these assessments to get a sense of what change are we having at the system level. Is the change we are having lasting beyond some of these things? And of course, some of the things we've learned through these surveys after the intervention has ended is that, yes, money was allocated. Like one of the win in one of our projects was that the ministry actually introduced a budget for the research department, you know, for the very first time, given the advocacy we had been having with the top leadership. Now, when we went back through this survey several months later, you realize that that money was actually never used by the department, because the money was then later allocated to something else, you know. And so our big win that we had reported, now the ministry has money for this department, actually ended up being, the money ended up being used for other things and not what the department had hoped to do. And so just sharing some of the complexities with measuring change, long-term change over time, and also how that gets sustained. So I don't have good answers. I'm just sharing some examples of what we've done. Of course, we've also picked out a bit some stories of change, stories of success, of how people have engaged with some of the tools we have developed for this. And again, just following up individuals and finding out if people say this particular individual has done this, can we get to maybe talk to them a bit more to create a story to understand how that change happened over time. So that's partly what we have done, but I think there is need for very good tools in terms of incrementally tracking change over the longer term. And often funding is a big challenge because there's no money. Once a project is funded, it ends, that is it. So there isn't often money for that. So institutions like AFIDEP need to commit or find resources from elsewhere to be able to continuously track that change over time. And often that remains a challenge in terms of funding, in terms of good tools, and of course, because of the complexity within systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Rhona?
Carina, just a quick one. There is noise behind me, some construction. If it's really loud, let me know, and I'll definitely move. But so like, you know, measuring change, you know, just reaffirming what Rose just said, you know, the change is long term. It's really long term. Some of the change that we are seeing now in some places is from things done at, you know, and had you asked me at that time whether what we were doing, you know, led to anything, I would have said no. I would have kind of hung up my boots and said, this is not working. But I think just understanding that change, and if people use the word impact, it is definitely long term. But some of the things that we're doing in, you know, with collaborators is being able to put value to change that is in process, where you might not be talking about impact, but you're talking about influence. Is there any influence actually happening within, you know, the longer term process? Are there small changes we can say, but I think that, you know, there's something happening, you know? Definitely what we were seeing 2 years ago is not what we are seeing now, you know? So working out indicators that can give value to influence, value to things that show change in the process. And I think this is something that has come from a conversation, again, you know, within EIDM circles, where there has been a lot of push for the conventional, you know, this is changing now. But in the past, we've had that conventional ask, you know, what is the impact of the work you're doing? Where this was understood like any other, like, you know, a normal biomedical research project, you know, I will see death or not, you know, things like that. And so very slowly people are understanding that this is behavior change, behavior that is not based on an individual, but on institutions and on whole countries and on global levels. I mean, look at what we were seeing during the pandemic, okay, in the early days of the pandemic around evidence and decision-making and behaviors, you know, to change those behaviors that are not only influenced by the evidence, you know, it is very, very, it takes time. However, that is not an excuse that you know, it's not an excuse that we give and say we're not going to measure anything now because look, I can't measure a thing. So one of the things we do measure, and we use a framework or a modified kind of framework that some people might have bumped into at some point, is a theory of planned behavior. Okay. So for somebody to behave in a certain way, they don't wake up today and do it, you know? It actually is a kind of calculated, and not even rationally or not even consciously, they unconsciously calculate their behavior. And you can measure that because it is dependent on their attitude towards the behavior. So for instance, if we're saying use evidence to do something, it starts with the attitude, do I want to do it? You know, it's time consuming. So you can measure whether they will behave a certain way by measuring their attitude. And if you are doing interventions that affect attitude, you should be able to measure that change, you know, slowly by slowly. The other thing that affects that is the subjective norm. You know, their normative beliefs about this, then how they're thinking about it subjectively, their intention, and then eventually they'll behave, you know. The other thing is their perceived behavioral control. How much control do they think they have over this behavior? And if you're talking about systems issues, people have individual control. They have learned something, they want to do it, but how much control do they have at the system level to be able to actually do it? And as you do systems things happening and changing and, you know, your interventions, how much are individuals feeling like they have some sort of control over what they can do? So you can actually you can measure unintended behavior. So we are measuring that this system will be able to do ABC and D 10 years from now by measuring some indicators set around, you know, attitudes, subjective norms, and control around behavior. And I think there's a lot of work that's happening in that space. But I think the idea is to understand that systems issues do take time, and what we are measuring along the way are things like influence, those small changes that will eventually let us know what has happened.
Mm-hmm. And in a way, Rhona, what you've done is you brought now for me kind of full circle, because I think bringing, when we talk about it, but how do we measure impact and influence, and bringing back the attitude and the norm of the individual, we're kind of bringing back to how important individual capacity development is and what we foreground in that. And so it's again the nested idea. I think one of the things, if you put a systems lens on, is that you start to understand that individual level capacity development and organization and system all are integrated and all kind of have feedback loops to one another that I think are really, really important. Now, I'm sure the rest of the audience is like me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is that?
Emphasize what you were saying, that, you know, yes, there's actually no point in building a system when individuals don't have the capacities. And there's no point in building individuals and the system doesn't provide for what they want. So yes, yeah, just in agreement with you.
Yeah. I would probably want to continue listening to the two of you for another few days, but I do want to make sure that our audience doesn't feel like only an audience. So I just wanted to double check. If you have a question, please post it in the chat. If you want to raise a comment, please, I'm very, very happy that you put up your hand, and I'm happy to come with you. I think we've dealt with there was a question from Kerry. I think there's comments that speaks about measuring change, attitude, subjective, non-calculated behavior. People love that behavioral change that you're bringing in. Just checking, anyone who have a comment or a question, if you want to raise your hand or post in the chat, this is your chance to add a voice to some awesome stuff. Otherwise, I am going to continue just allowing the two to speak, although our time probably is running out. Cool. I not seeing, just really lots of lovely, I think, comments in the chats, both of you, that's kind of confirming the comments you're making. And since we kind of a few more minutes left, I wonder if I can ask the two of you. So, I mean, I think if we think of where we started, we said we are interested, we want to explore some areas around EIDM pedagogies and whether pedagogy is the right word, from the individual all the way to the systems level. If you think of all of that, what would be and I'm literally, I think why I'm asking this, I'm reminded of, I'm not sure if I'm sure you had it as well, when you visit your granny, your gogo, all our gogos have smells, you know, it's her smell. And there is something for me that when I leave my granny and I hug her and I go, there's a smell of her that linger with me. So I want to ask the two of you, what is the smell, the flavor that you want to leave with us, that we should go with, that should linger? So kind of another way to ask you, what's your kind of takeaway message around EIDM pedagogies, and whether it is what next, whether we should do with this, or what is the thing you want to foreground prominently? Rhona, what would you say is the lingering sense you want to leave with us?
How many minutes did you say we had? Like an hour? There's so much I want to leave with you. But I think, Carina, for me, we've come a long way in this capacity building endeavor, and it's so heartwarming. It's so heartwarming from the times when you knew everybody, and you could count 1, 2, 3. Yes, I know so and so. They, who could do EIDM, and just the amount of capacity that has been built, both individually but also in institutions, is really, really heartwarming. And this is not to negate how much we still have to do, a lot, because we've also learned, what more we need to do. But I think Africa should be proud of itself. Africa is leading, in so many ways, in terms of not only practicing EIDM, but building capacity from experience. A lot of what we've talked about today, Rose and I, is from what we have practiced. And it's not the two of us, but teams, partnerships. There's so much that's happening that we're learning from each other. We have these learning journeys with ACE, every year, a little disorganized by the pandemic. But what you learn from what ACE is doing, so for those listening that might not know ACE, but should know ACE, the African Center for Evidence in, at the University of Johannesburg, who basically are hosting us, or host the Africa Evidence Network. We've had these learning journeys with the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis, where we kind of sit and talk about our experiences, and we say, man, we messed up there, like, ooh, that didn't work out very well. And how did you make it work? There's so much that we've learned in terms of building our own capacities, but also building other people's capacities. And I think that we should be proud of ourselves there, but also harnessing those lessons. I think that the only way we shall do capacity building, or that we shall have pedagogies that apply, very well to our context, very well to our situations, that mean something, that change something, is by actually understanding what works in certain situations and what works in another situation or doesn't. And that means that we have to sit and harness lessons from what we're doing. So these things of just ticking off, did we do 6 workshops? Yes. What did the funder want? 8. Oh, okay, we fell. I think, yes, we can do that, and that's fine. But I think we have to deliberately sit down and understand and learn what is it we're learning from what we're doing, And that means also facing some hard questions, some hard facts. If we implement something and it doesn't work, if we try and build capacity a certain way and it doesn't work, we didn't fail. There are lots of lessons along the way. And I think what I want to leave with all of us is that let's harness those lessons. That's the only way we'll do it right, That's the only way we'll do what is relevant for what we're trying to do. So, accolades already for what we have done. Let's harness the lessons, let's learn and use those to actually make more appropriate approaches. That's it for me, Carina.
Thanks, Rhona. Rose?
The beauty of speaking second is that I don't have to say anything, but just to say I agree with what Rhona said. I'll just, I totally agree, honestly. So I would just add 2 things. That what has been done so far on EIDM in Africa, we've really just scratched the surface. And so just encouraging us and the colleagues here to explore. I think there's so much that has been done on individual capacity development on the continent. We are getting a lot more now into systemic focus, but even that is really just scratching the surface. So echoing what Rhona has said in terms of capacity development, that there's still a lot more that we need to do. Even as Africa, we are leading but we still have to do a lot more in developing capacity, mentoring, but also looking at the systemic level. And so the need for us to continue expanding EIDM, just so that we have more and more people interested across the continent on board, so that if we had this webinar maybe 5 years from now, hopefully we would have more than double the people here, because we've expanded the fields, and we would have a lot more people here that we don't know their names, because I think I'm looking at the list of people here, and many of them we know each other. So I'm hoping we'll get a point where there's so many EIDM champions across the continent that we don't know each other, So that is one. The second one is just the need for us to improve measurement. Measurement still remains an area of growth for EIDM, particularly at systemic level, but even at individual level. When you look at the scholarship, even on just EIDM training or knowledge translation training, how you measure the value of the change that training does over time is still not so much is being done there. And the studies that have been done have used not very rigorous ways of measuring these things. And so for us to continue focusing on robust measurement of the value or the change we are making at individual level, but also at systemic level, just so that you can continue demonstrating that we are making a difference with very good evidence. And that also would mean that there is more investments, maybe from our own governments into this process, when you're able to document and just demonstrate the difference that this work is making. Thank you.
Amazing. Honestly, the two of you, I feel like we should have weekly conversations. We should have a podcast with the two of you that just goes out weekly and keep our, and honestly, like when you were stimulated, your head goes zzz. It feels like there's electricity in my head running with the two of you. So thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to the two of you, engaging with the two of you. Really value how you both share so freely from such amazing wisdom and experience. So thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone else is doing the claps. And Siziwe, I then hand back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carina, and thank you very much to Rhona and Rose. It's been an amazing session, and I'm sure even the participants are feeling the same way. In closing the session, the recording of this webinar and the blog will be published to ensure that we continue engagements on this topic, because this is really an interesting topic that we need to continue those conversations. Please follow us on LinkedIn. That's where asynchronic conversations will continue there as well. So that's really amazing. So just to say, our next webinar is on the 18th of May. So we'll be discussing capacity development delivery mechanisms, such as the communities of practice and mentoring and others. So please join us and look out on social media as we publish about the next event that is coming up, so that you can join us again. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. We really appreciate your participation through the chat and all of the discussions that has been continuing. Please continue those discussions with us on LinkedIn. I would really love to hear your ideas there as well, sharing your own experiences, connecting with people that maybe you haven't connected with, or those that you want or interested to connect with. Other than that, thank you very much. And I'll take this time to adjourn the webinar and look forward to seeing you again on the other webinar that will be hosted in May. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you very much for participating. Thank you. Bye-bye.